courtroom was alive with tension. Papers rustling, whispers rippling, the sharp echo of a gavel striking somewhere in the building like thunder in the distance. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat high on the bench, her posture calm, her eyes steady. Another day, another case, or so she thought. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. The state of Louisiana versus James Anderson. For Eleanor, it should have been routine. Assault, robbery, resisting arrest. Just another defendant in shackles. Another name on a docket. Another story swallowed by the system. But when the man shuffled into the room, chains clinking softly, the air around her shifted. Her hand faltered on the gavel. Her heart stuttered in her chest. Because the man standing before her wasn't a stranger. It was James Anderson, her James. The boy she once knew better than herself. The boy she had raced bicycles with down dusty Louisiana roads. The boy who once promised her beneath the stars that they'd always have each other's backs. Now here he was, accused of a violent crime. His eyes shadowed with years of hardship. His wrists bound in iron. The room froze. Eleanor's world tilted. And in that breathless silence, one terrifying thought seized her. What happens when justice demands she judge the boy who once held her heart? Stay with me, because what unfolded in that courtroom wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning, a story of childhood promises, broken systems, and a single verdict that would change everything. The prosecutor's voice droned in the background, listing the charges like an executioner reading a sentence. But Eleanor wasn't listening, not really. Her eyes were locked on James. She could still see him as he once was, barefoot in the sticky Louisiana heat, mud on his knees, a fishing rod too big for his small hands. That summer afternoon by the creek came rushing back, like the smell of magnolia blossoms carried on a warm breeze. She had wandered too far from her own yard, curiosity tugging her down to the water. There, she found him, line tangled, frustration written across his face. "Need help?" she'd asked, timid but eager. He'd glanced up, wary at first, then a small grin. "Only if you're good with knots." That was the beginning. From that day forward, they became inseparable, bound by the kind of friendship only children know. Innocent, unbreakable, dangerous in a town that drew hard lines between families like hers and families like his. They spent evenings lying beneath the magnolia tree, whispering their dreams into the night air. James's voice, low and certain, once asked, "You ever think about leaving this place? Going somewhere people don't stare just because we're sitting together?" Eleanor had laughed, brushing it off. But James wasn't joking. Even then, he saw the world for what it was, a place quick to judge, quick to divide. Their friendship wasn't just rare. It was forbidden. The whispers followed them. The stares, the disapproval simmering like a storm cloud. And then one night, it all shattered. She could still hear her father's voice, sharp as a blade. "Eleanor." Inside. "Now." His tone left no room for argument. James had stood frozen on the porch, his jaw tight. "Go on," he'd said quietly. "I'll see you around." But they never did. Not really. Her father had forbidden it. His family moved away, and Eleanor buried herself in books, chasing ambition, climbing higher until she sat in black robes on a polished oak bench. Yet even as she rose, she never forgot the boy by the creek. Now, years later, that same boy, grown, hardened, broken in ways she couldn't yet understand, stood accused of a crime that could cage him forever. Her gavel felt heavier than it ever had before. And inside, a single question roared louder than any courtroom whisper. "What happened to you, James?" The courtroom was not just a place of justice anymore. It had become a battlefield between memory and truth. But the evidence about to be presented would blur those lines even further. The courtroom settled into a fragile silence as the prosecutor rose, his sharp suit crisp, his tone clipped and certain. Richard Powell was a man who thrived on control, his words precise like a scalpel. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is about violence. A man who walked into a convenience store, unprovoked, and attacked an innocent clerk before fleeing with stolen money. The evidence will show," beyond a reasonable doubt, that James Anderson is guilty of this crime. Every syllable struck like a hammer. Eleanor kept her face unreadable, her gavel resting by her hand. But inside, her pulse raced. Powell's voice painted James as nothing more than a headline, another statistic in a system already stacked against him. When the defense attorney rose, the air shifted. Lisa Porter, young, confident, her voice ringing with quiet conviction. The prosecution wants you to believe this is simple. But justice is never simple. My client has maintained his innocence from the start, and the evidence you will see is not as clear as Mr. Powell claims. This case isn't about assumption. It's about truth. Eleanor studied James. His head was bowed, shoulders hunched, as though carrying an invisible weight. Did he even believe in his own defense anymore? Or had the years of arrests, failures, and disappointments convinced him the outcome was already written? The first witness was called, the convenience store clerk. Nervous, shifting in his seat, he recounted the night of the crime. He came in late wearing a hoodie, argued with the cashier, then jumped the counter. He grabbed the register and hit the clerk. His words painted James as the shadowy figure. Lisa rose for cross-examination, her tone sharp but calm. Mr. Chambers, you said the man wore a red hoodie, correct? Yes. And did you see his face clearly? The witness hesitated. Not really. The hood was up, so you can't say without absolute certainty that the man you saw that night is sitting in this courtroom today. The clerk squirmed, glancing at the jury. I guess not. No further questions. The jury shifted in their seats, whispers buzzing faintly. Eleanor noticed it, uncertainty. For the first time, a crack in the perfect picture Powell had tried to paint. Then came the grainy surveillance video. The jury leaned forward, the room's attention locked on the flickering black and white footage. A figure entered in a red hoodie, movements quick, almost frantic. The camera blurred, the face unrecognizable. And then, abruptly, the recording ended. Powell's voice was smooth. That man is James Anderson. The timeline, the evidence, all point to him. But Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The video, it didn't show enough. Too dark, too grainy. Anyone could have been beneath that hood. And yet, James had been found nearby. That fact hung like a shadow over everything. The courtroom adjourned for lunch, tension heavy in the air. Eleanor returned to her chambers, her assistant Margaret trailing behind. Judge Hayes, are you all right? You seem distracted. Eleanor forced a smile. I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind. But she wasn't fine. The boy she once trusted with every secret was now a man fighting for his freedom. And she was the one who held his fate in her hands. The cracks were showing, but doubt alone doesn't free a man. As the next witness stepped forward, the very officer who arrested James, the trial would take a turn no one in that courtroom was prepared for. When the courtroom reconvened, the air carried a new heaviness, as though everyone sensed the trial was entering dangerous waters. Reporters scribbled furiously, the jury leaned in with sharpened attention, and Judge Eleanor Hayes steadied herself on the bench, her fingers brushing against the cool edge of the gavel. The defense called their next witness, Officer Daniel Harris, the arresting officer. He was a burly man with a square jaw and a stiff uniform that seemed too tight across his shoulders. His presence radiated authority, but as he took the stand, Eleanor caught the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. Lisa Porter approached, her voice calm, deliberate. Officer Harris, you apprehended Mr. Anderson, correct? That's right, he replied, his tone clipped, almost rehearsed. You wrote in your report that he was detained 2 blocks from the scene of the robbery? Yes. Lisa took a measured step closer. What specifically led you to believe Mr. Anderson was the suspect? Harris shifted. He matched the description. Black male, mid-40s, dark clothing. Lisa paused, letting the words hang in the air before striking. Dark clothing, she repeated. But the suspect was reported wearing a red hoodie. Did you find such a hoodie on Mr. Anderson when you searched him? Harris's jaw clenched. No, but he could have discarded it. Lisa tilted her head, her voice steady but sharp. Could have. Did you or any other officer search the surrounding area for this discarded hoodie? Silence. Harris's eyes flickered toward the prosecutor's table, then back. No. There wasn't time. A ripple of whispers cut through the gallery. Lisa pressed harder. So, to clarify, you arrested Mr. Anderson based on a vague description, with no physical evidence tying him to the scene. Harris bristled. I followed protocol. Lisa's tone sharpened. Protocol? Or assumption? The officer's lips thinned, but he said nothing. Eleanor's gaze swept to the jury. A few members shifted uncomfortably. Doubt, real, visible doubt, was beginning to creep into their expressions. Lisa gave the faintest of nods, her voice quiet but cutting. No further questions. When Harris stepped down, his credibility bruised, the prosecutor tried to salvage the moment with redirect, but the damage was already done. The jurors had seen hesitation. They had seen weakness. For Eleanor, it was a storm inside. She trusted in the system for so long, believed in its ability to find truth in the chaos. But watching the cracks widen now, she wondered, had James been caught in something far larger than his own mistakes? As the day wore on, Eleanor found herself staring at James. He sat straighter now, as if the officer's faltering testimony had breathed the smallest spark of hope back into him. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, hers steady, his wounded but unbroken. It was enough to remind her of that boy by the creek, the one who once dreamed of leaving Hammond and never looking back. And yet, here he was, shackled, judged, a life hanging on the fragile threads of perception and proof. The gavel struck, adjournment echoing through the chamber. But as the crowd filed out, Eleanor knew the trial had only just begun to unravel. The officer's testimony left the courtroom shaken, but the defense was just getting started. Next came evidence that would challenge not just the case, but the very integrity of the system itself. The next morning, tension buzzed through the courtroom like static before a storm. The defense was ready to strike. Lisa Porter stood, her expression sharp with purpose. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Samuel Green, forensic video analyst. A thin man with glasses stepped into the witness box, carrying an air of quiet authority. He had spent weeks dissecting the grainy surveillance tape. The jury leaned forward as Lisa began. Dr. Green, in your expert opinion, can the footage definitively identify Mr. Anderson as the suspect? He shook his head. No, the quality is too poor. Height and build appear inconsistent with Mr. Anderson's measurements. Additionally, he paused, glancing toward the jury. The timestamp on the footage was altered, meaning the recording may not accurately represent the time of the alleged crime. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Powell jumped to his feet, his voice sharp. Speculation. The tape was entered into evidence. But Green remained calm. Ideal in facts, not speculation. This video cannot be trusted as conclusive evidence. Eleanor's chest tightened. The prosecution's foundation was crumbling. First the uncertain witness, then the officer's shaky testimony, and now this proof that the very video tying James to the crime was flawed. For the first time, hope stirred not just in James's eyes, but in Eleanor's heart. But the greatest risk was yet to come. Against all odds, James himself would take the stand, and his testimony could either save him or destroy him. The defense had weighed the risks carefully. A defendant testifying was always a gamble, but James had insisted. They need to hear me, he told Lisa, his voice steady despite the chains at his wrists. When he took the stand, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Shackles clinked softly as he sat, his eyes scanning the jury, then flickering, just for a moment, to Eleanor. She forced her face into judicial calm, but inside her heart thundered. Lisa began gently. Mr. Anderson, tell the court where you were on the night of the incident. James's voice was rough, but it carried a raw sincerity that silenced even the scribbling reporters. I was walking home from a friend's place. That's it. I wasn't in that store. I never touched that clerk. I didn't steal a thing. Lisa nodded. And what happened when you were stopped by the police? James's jaw tightened. They didn't ask questions. They didn't look for anyone else. They just saw me and decided I fit. The words hung heavy in the air. Powell rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp as a blade. Mr. Anderson, you have a record, don't you? Petty theft, loitering, disorderly conduct. Doesn't that show a pattern? James didn't flinch. I've made mistakes. I've been poor, hungry. I've taken wrong turns. But I never hurt anybody. Not like this. Not what you're accusing me of. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. All my life, people decided who I was before I had a chance to prove them wrong. And I'm tired. Tired of fighting to be seen as more than just a suspect. The silence that followed was electric. Even the jurors who had looked skeptical before now shifted, their expressions softening under the weight of his words. Eleanor's throat tightened. This wasn't just testimony. It was a plea for justice, for dignity, for the boy she once knew beneath the magnolia tree. But sincerity alone doesn't win trials. Closing arguments were coming, and both sides would fight with everything they had. One misstep, and James's fragile hope could shatter forever. The trial had become a storm, and now came its final clash, the closing arguments. Richard Powell rose first, voice firm, eyes piercing. Ladies and gentlemen, do not be swayed by emotion. The evidence places James Anderson near the scene. His past, his behavior, his record, they form a pattern. Justice demands accountability. His words were sharp, but something in the jury's faces suggested the certainty was slipping. Then Lisa Porter stood. Her tone was softer, but every syllable struck deeper. The prosecution wants you to trust assumptions. But justice isn't about assumptions, it's about proof. No clear identification, no physical evidence, a video tampered with, an arrest made on nothing more than appearance. She paused, letting silence press against the walls. You are not just deciding a case. You are deciding whether truth matters more than prejudice. Eleanor's eyes scanned the jury. Some leaned forward, captivated. Others sat back, conflicted. The air itself seemed to pulse with the weight of the choice before them. When the gavel struck for deliberation, the room emptied in a low hum of whispers. James sat motionless, head bowed, as if bracing for a future already written. The jury was gone, locked away with the power to decide everything. Hours passed, and when they returned, the entire room would hold its breath for one word. Guilty or not guilty. The jury was gone. The courtroom left in uneasy silence. Hours passed, each tick of the clock a hammer against Eleanor's chest. She sat alone at the bench, replaying every testimony, every flicker of doubt, every shadow of memory. And through it all, James's eyes lingered in her mind, pleading not for sympathy but for fairness. At last, the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The jury filed back in, faces drawn, expressions unreadable. Eleanor's hand hovered near the gavel, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The forewoman stood, paper trembling in her grasp. The air in the room thickened to the point of breaking. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson, she paused, her voice unsteady, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few cheers. James sagged in his chair, as though invisible chains had finally been cut loose. Eleanor struck her gavel for silence, but inside, her own composure was cracking. Relief, sorrow, regret, all tangled together. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within, "you are free to go." Later, as the room emptied, James approached the bench. The years between them stretched heavy in the space that separated them. His voice was quiet, raw. "You knew me, all this time. Why didn't you say anything?" Her throat tightened. "Because I couldn't. I had to be fair. If I'd spoken, it could have destroyed the case." He studied her, pain and understanding warring in his expression. "Fair," he murmured. "The world's never been fair, not for people like me." She looked down at the polished oak, her reflection fractured in its sheen. "You're right. I wish I'd done more. Back then and now." For a moment, silence. Then James gave the faintest nod, turned, and walked out through the courthouse doors into the fading light. Eleanor remained seated, alone in the echo of the courtroom. She had upheld the law, but the trial had shown her something deeper. That justice was more than verdicts, more than procedure. It was human, fragile, demanding courage. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, Eleanor Hayes made a vow. She could not rewrite the past, but she would not let silence or rules stop her from fighting for the future. A future where fairness was more than a word carved above a courtroom door. If stories like this move you, if you believe justice should mean more than assumptions, then join this journey. Hit that subscribe button, because here, we keep searching for truth. No matter how difficult, no matter how painful. Together, we shine a light where it matters most.